Single dad waiter Marcus Hale never imagined that one simple dance would change his life forever, especially not while a billionaire mother watched from the shadows above the ballroom, unseen and silent, as her disabled daughter sat alone fighting back tears. The grand ballroom of the Harborview Grand Hotel shimmered beneath cascading crystal chandeliers, golden light reflecting off polished marble floors as the annual spring gala for Brighton Academy unfolded in a swirl of silk dresses, pressed suits, and camera flashes. Music pulsed through the air while children laughed and parents clinked glasses of sparkling cider, celebrating privilege, success, and carefully curated perfection. Yet in the far corner of the room, partially hidden behind a decorative column wrapped in white roses, 11-year-old Sophie Laurent sat in her silver wheelchair, her lavender gown spreading beautifully around her legs that could no longer carry her. 2 years earlier, a skiing accident had changed her life forever, and though the finest doctor's money could buy tried their best, she had not walked since. Tonight was supposed to feel normal, magical even, but as classmates rushed past her toward the dance floor, none of them stopped. None of them met her eyes for more than a second. A group of boys whispered just loudly enough for her to hear, "Why come to a dance if you can't dance?" And their laughter, soft but sharp, cut deeper than they realized. Nearby, a cluster of well-dressed parents observed her with tilted heads and sympathetic smiles that never quite reached their eyes. "Poor thing," one woman murmured. "Her mother owns half the city, but she can't fix that." And another replied, "Money can build towers, but it can't buy miracles." Their quiet chuckles blending with the music as if cruelty were simply part of the evening's soundtrack. Sophie lowered her gaze to her folded hands, pretending not to hear, pretending not to care, but the shine in her eyes betrayed her. Across the ballroom, weaving between tables with a polished tray balanced expertly in one hand, Marcus Hale moved with quiet efficiency. At 35, he wore the standard uniform of the hotel staff, crisp white shirt, black vest, bow tie, but no one in the room knew that just 6 years ago his name had appeared in architectural journals, that he had once owned a thriving design firm specializing in waterfront restoration projects, that he had stood in rooms like this as a guest rather than as hired help. They did not know about Elena, his wife, whose sudden heart failure had shattered his world in a single winter evening, or about the mountain of medical bills that followed, or about the investors who withdrew their support when grief stole his focus. They did not know how quickly success can evaporate, how swiftly admiration turns to absence. All they saw was a waiter clearing empty glasses and wiping invisible fingerprints from tables already spotless. Marcus had taken the job because his 8-year-old son, Noah, needed stability, needed school supplies, and warm meals and bedtime stories delivered by a father who refused to collapse completely. Pride had become a luxury he could not afford. As he approached the dessert table to collect abandoned plates of half-eaten cake, he heard the whispers aimed at Sophie, heard the dismissive laughter, and something inside him tightened. He glanced toward her and saw the way she tried to make herself smaller, as if shrinking might ease the discomfort others felt around her. The band transitioned into a slower melody, couples drifting closer together beneath the lights, fathers spinning daughters in gentle circles while mothers filmed the moment for social media. Sophie remained in the corner, motionless, her chair angled away from the dance floor as though she had already accepted exclusion. On the mezzanine balcony above, unnoticed by nearly everyone, stood Isabella Laurent in an emerald gown that shimmered like deep water. Founder and CEO of Laurent Global Industries, a woman whose business decisions moved markets and shaped skylines, she watched the scene below with sharp, observant eyes. She had arrived late from a conference overseas and chose not to announce herself, wanting to see how her daughter fared without the protective aura of her presence. What she saw made her jaw tighten. She heard the comments, every careless remark drifting upward through the music, and though her instinct was to intervene, she remained still, measuring the room, waiting to see if anyone would step forward on their own. Back on the ballroom floor, Marcus paused beside a tall arrangement of lilies, tray in hand, as another group of students passed Sophie without acknowledgement. One girl glanced at the wheelchair and quickly looked away, embarrassed by her own discomfort. Marcus remembered standing alone in an empty office after his partners left, remembered the hollow echo of footsteps fading down a hallway, remembered how invisibility feels heavier than failure. He set the tray down slowly on a nearby table. The decision formed not in grand heroics, but in quiet resolve. He thought of Noah and the lessons he hoped his son would learn not from lectures, but from example. He adjusted his vest, drew a steady breath, and began walking across the ballroom floor toward the girl in the corner, unaware that every step was being tracked by the eyes of a billionaire mother above, and that within minutes the entire room would fall silent, forced to confront the difference between status and humanity. The moment Marcus Hale stepped onto the center of the ballroom floor and bowed before the girl in the wheelchair, the music seemed to soften, as if even the band sensed that something unexpected was about to unfold. Conversations thinned into whispers, heels paused mid-step, and several parents lowered their phones in confusion as the waiter in a black vest addressed the billionaire's daughter as though she were the guest of honor. Sophie Laurent looked up at him, startled, her lashes still damp from tears she had tried so hard to hide, and for a second she glanced over her shoulder to make sure he was truly speaking to her. "May I have this dance, miss?" Marcus asked gently, extending his hand with the same formal courtesy he once used when greeting clients in glass-walled boardrooms. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. "Is he serious?" someone muttered. "This is inappropriate," another parent whispered, shaking her head. "He's probably trying to get attention." Sophie hesitated, uncertainty flickering across her face as she became acutely aware of every eye in the room fixed on her wheelchair, on her legs that would not respond, on the moment that could either deepen her humiliation or transform it. Marcus did not rush her. He did not look around at the crowd. He kept his eyes steady and kind, patient as though he had all the time in the world. Slowly, almost cautiously, Sophie placed her hand in his. The contact was light but deliberate, and Marcus felt the tremble in her fingers. With careful movements, he guided her wheelchair toward the open space at the center of the dance floor. The band faltered briefly, confused, until one of the musicians, an older pianist with observant eyes, shifted into a smooth, flowing melody that filled the silence with warmth. Marcus positioned himself beside Sophie rather than behind her, crouching slightly so they were eye level. "Ready for a spin?" he asked softly, and though her voice caught when she answered, she nodded. He placed one hand lightly on the handle of her chair and the other in her hand, then began to move, slow and graceful, turning the wheelchair in gentle arcs that matched the rhythm of the music. The lavender fabric of her gown shimmered under the chandeliers as the chair rotated, transforming what had once seemed like a symbol of limitation into part of the choreography itself. Gasps rose quietly from different corners of the ballroom. Instead of pushing mechanically, Marcus danced, stepping in time, pivoting smoothly, making each turn deliberate and elegant. Sophie's tentative smile widened into laughter, a clear, bright sound that sliced cleanly through the earlier cruelty. For the first time that night, she was not an object of pity or discomfort. She was simply a girl at a dance, being twirled beneath golden lights. Some of the students who had whispered earlier stared with wide eyes, their expressions shifting from amusement to something closer to awe. A young boy nudged his friend and said, "That actually looks cool," and neither of them laughed this time. Near the edge of the floor, the same parents who had made quiet remarks stiffened. One woman folded her arms defensively. "This is a spectacle," she murmured, though her voice lacked conviction. Another parent exhaled slowly, watching Sophie's radiant expression, and felt the first prick of shame. Above them all, Isabella Laurent gripped the balcony railing, her polished composure cracking as she watched her daughter's face transform. It had been months since she had seen that kind of unfiltered joy. She had hired specialists, motivational coaches, therapists, adaptive sports trainers, each promising progress, confidence, resilience. But none of them had given Sophie this, a moment of pure belonging without instruction or strategy. Down below, Marcus leaned closer. "You're doing beautifully," he said quietly. Sophie laughed again. "I feel like I'm flying." "Then let's fly properly," he replied, and executed a slightly faster spin that made her gown flare outward in a shimmering circle. The band followed his energy, the melody swelling, and something remarkable began to happen. The crowd stopped whispering. Phones were raised again, but not to mock, to capture. Teachers exchanged surprised glances. The principal, who moments earlier had been worrying about catering logistics, found himself blinking back unexpected emotion. Marcus continued guiding the dance with effortless intuition, careful never to jostle the chair too sharply, always maintaining balance and rhythm. He extended his arm dramatically at the end of one turn, dipping his head as though presenting royalty to the court, and Sophie lifted her chin instinctively, playing along, embodying the role with shy but growing confidence. Applause began hesitantly from one corner of the room, a single pair of hands clapping uncertainly. Then another joint. Within seconds the sound multiplied, filling the ballroom with an entirely different kind of noise than before. Not laughter, not whispers. Applause. Sophie looked around in disbelief as the sound grew louder, and Marcus leaned close again. "See," he murmured, "they were just waiting for you to show them how it's done." When the song neared its end, he slowed the turns, bringing her gently to a stop at the very center of the floor. As the final note lingered in the air, Marcus released her hand and bowed once more, deeper this time, as though she had bestowed the honor upon him. The ballroom erupted into full applause, echoing off marble and glass. Sophie's cheeks flushed pink, her eyes shining not with tears now, but with pride. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice steady for the first time that evening. "That was the best dance I've ever had." Marcus smiled warmly. The best dances usually are the ones no one expects. What neither of them realized in that glowing moment was that Isabella Laurent had already turned from the balcony and begun descending the staircase, her heels striking each step with calm authority, her expression unreadable but her decision made. The applause had not yet faded when the most powerful woman in the room reached the dance floor, and the crowd, sensing a shift in gravity, slowly fell silent once more. As the applause still echoed against the crystal chandeliers and marble columns, the sound slowly thinned into a tense, uncertain silence when Isabella Laurent stepped onto the ballroom floor, her emerald gown trailing behind her like a quiet storm, and every parent, teacher, and student instinctively straightened as though called to attention. She did not rush. She did not smile. She walked with measured calm to the very center of the floor where Marcus stood beside Sophie's wheelchair, still slightly breathless from the dance. Conversations died completely. Even the band lowered their instruments. Isabella's eyes swept across the room first, not at Marcus, not even at her daughter, but at the crowd, at the faces that had whispered, laughed, pitted, and judged. "I arrived earlier than you think," she said evenly, her voice controlled but carrying effortlessly to every corner of the ballroom. "I was on the balcony. I heard everything." A visible ripple of discomfort passed through the parents nearest the dessert table. One woman's hand tightened around her clutched purse. A father cleared his throat awkwardly. Isabella continued, "In a room filled with accomplished professionals, community leaders, and role models for children, only one person chose to show my daughter dignity tonight." She turned slowly and looked directly at Marcus. And it was not someone wearing a designer suit. The words landed heavily. Marcus felt heat rise to his face. He had not acted for recognition. In fact, he suddenly wished he could retreat quietly to the edges of the room again. Isabella stepped closer to Sophie and gently placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "I have spent 2 years trying to protect her from moments like this," she said, her voice softening just slightly. "I have built walls of security, opportunity, and resources around her. But tonight I learned something important. Protection is not the same as inclusion." She looked back at Marcus. "You did not see a wheelchair. You saw a girl who deserved a dance." Marcus swallowed, unsure how to respond in front of so many people. "Every kid deserves to feel like they belong," he said simply. "That's all." A murmur of uneasy agreement moved through the crowd. Isabella studied him more closely now, recognition flickering in her eyes. "Your name?" she asked. "Marcus Hale." The name seemed to unlock something. "Hale," she repeated thoughtfully. "You designed the East River flood restoration project 8 years ago, didn't you?" The question startled more than just Marcus. Several older guests exchanged surprised looks. "Yes," he answered quietly. "I did." A teacher near the front gasped softly. "I remember that project," she said. "It won awards. The waterfront redesign saved hundreds of homes." Isabella nodded. "My company funded part of that initiative. I remember the presentation. You spoke about rebuilding not just structures, but communities." She paused, then added pointedly, "Interesting how life can shift someone from keynote speaker to catering staff." The comment was not mocking. It was observational. The room absorbed the implication. Marcus felt exposed, but stood steady. "Life happens," he replied. Isabella held his gaze a moment longer, then addressed the crowd again. "You measure success by titles, income, social standing. But tonight the most successful person in this room was the man who chose kindness when it was inconvenient." Several parents lowered their eyes. One mother stepped forward hesitantly. I'm sorry," she said toward Sophie. "I shouldn't have laughed." A teenage boy followed, then another student, and soon a small cluster gathered around Sophie offering quiet apologies. Sophie looked overwhelmed but nodded graciously, her earlier confidence still glowing faintly. Isabella watched this unfold, then turned back to Marcus. "Walk with me," she said. They stepped a short distance away from the crowd, while conversations cautiously resumed at a lower volume. "I believe in investing in people who understand resilience," Isabella said plainly. L'Oran Global is launching a large-scale urban accessibility initiative next quarter. Public spaces designed inclusively from the ground up. We need leadership that understands both structural design and human perspective. Marcus blinked. "I haven't worked in the field in years." "Talent doesn't disappear," she replied. "It waits." He hesitated. "I'm a waiter now. I have a son to support. Stability matters more than pride." Isabella's expression softened in a way few employees had likely ever witnessed. "I'm not offering charity, Mr. Hale. I'm offering partnership. A position directing inclusive design strategy. Full salary, benefits, flexibility for your family." She let the weight of the offer settle between them. "I don't reward pity. I reward character." Across the room, Sophie watched anxiously. Marcus glanced toward her, then back at Isabella. "Why me, truly?" Isabella's voice dropped lower. "Because my daughter laughed tonight without thinking about what she couldn't do. That's influence. That's leadership. And because anyone who can restore confidence in 3 minutes on a dance floor can restore dignity in city planning." The simplicity of her reasoning disarmed him. He thought of his son Noah, of overdue bills, of dormant blueprints stored in boxes at the back of his closet. He thought of Elena and the bracelet still around his wrist. "She used to say when everything falls apart, rebuild smarter," he murmured. "Then rebuild smarter," Isabella replied. After a long breath, Marcus extended his hand, not as a waiter, not as a subordinate, but as an equal professional. "I'd like to hear more." Isabella shook his hand firmly. "Good. Because I prefer hiring people who act before they're asked." Word of the exchange traveled quickly through the ballroom. The shift in atmosphere was undeniable. The same parents who once whispered now spoke of inspiration. Teachers discussed new inclusion programs. Students gathered around Sophie not out of pity but curiosity and genuine interest. The narrative of the evening had changed. As the gala wound down and guests filtered toward the exits, Sophie rolled toward Marcus once more. "Are you going to be famous again?" she asked shyly. Marcus chuckled. "I don't know about famous, but I might design some ramps that are a lot more fun than stairs." She grinned. "Promise you'll save me the first dance next year?" He bowed slightly, repeating the gesture that started it all. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Near the entrance, Isabella watched them with quiet gratitude, no longer the untouchable billionaire on a balcony, but simply a mother who had witnessed a turning point. That night the headlines would not capture the full story. They would mention a corporate appointment weeks later, a strategic hire, an ambitious accessibility campaign. What they would not report was how it began, with a single father in a waiter's uniform choosing to cross a ballroom floor when everyone else stayed comfortably still. And long after the music faded and the lights dimmed, what remained was not the wealth in the room, but the reminder that dignity, once restored, echoes far louder than applause.